A dash of mystery, a sparkle of magic, and all things cozy. Join your host, Elle Hartford, for Cozy Alchemy, a proud member of the Authors on the Air network. Hello and welcome to Cozy Alchemy, the podcast all about cozy, magical books. I'm Elle, and my guest today is Amy Coombe, author of Stay for a Spell. We will get to that in just a minute. But first, Amy is going to start us off with a game of two truths and a lie.
Hi, it's really good to be here. And yes, here are my two truths and a lie. So, number one, I am qualified to teach physics at a high school level. Number two, I am an uncredited extra in the 2012 very indie film Cockneys vs. Zombies.
Okay.
And number three, my hands are so small that I have to wear child-sized gloves.
I love these. This is a very good range. Very good range. Okay. Physics extra. You know what? I am going to guess that the second one is the lie because I'm hoping that you are accredited extra.
That is the lie, actually, but it's actually I'm not an extra at all. Unfortunately, I was invited to be an extra, and it happened to be filming while I was out of town, and so I very, very sadly had to go back to them and say, "I'm so sorry. I would love to be in this, but I can't." So, sadly.
Yeah, that's a bummer that it's for that reason instead of the other. That's too bad. But how does one get on the list for that sort of being an extra? Like,
I have no idea. So basically, what I think happened is that my husband and I used to run a fairly well-known sort of geek culture blog, and
oh,
we live in London in the UK, and we're sort of part of this like UK geek culture scene. And
gotcha.
when they were trying to basically drum up interest for this tiny, tiny indie movie, they had the very good idea to basically get sort of the early version of influencers involved. And so
Right.
they, I think, put a call out to people who were, again, like I make it sound like it's like this incredibly exciting scene that we were in when really we were just two people sitting at a table writing a blog. Yes, I think that's how it happens. They invited both of us, and we just happened to be back in the US that week visiting family, so we couldn't do it.
Gotcha. That's a good tie-in though for the show and for your book as well.
Mhm.
So cool. So on that note, Stay for a Spell is coming out soon. Can you tell us a little bit about it to get us started?
Absolutely. Stay for a Spell
Hmm.
is the story of a young woman who happens to be a princess. She's the younger of two, and her sister does all the politics and is preparing to take the throne. And meanwhile, her job is basically what we might call a working royal. So she has to travel around the country and she has to cut ribbons and kiss babies and stuff. And what this woman wants more than anything in the world is to just have some time to herself to sit down and read a couple of books. Like she loves to read, and the only time she has to herself to read is when she's in her carriage going from one town to the other. And what happens is she pulls into this little town, notices a bookstore, gets very excited, runs inside, and promptly gets herself cursed. And the nature of the curse is that she can't leave the bookstore until she unlocks her heart's desire.
Right. The horror.
Exactly. She's not
Yeah.
remotely unhappy about it. But of course, the problem is, because that's, that's great. That's not much of a book, though. The problem is that, so her secretary is with her, and her secretary is like, oh no, we're going to have to go find a wizard and deal with this. So the secretary like hairs off to go find a wizard. But meanwhile, her parents are like, this is not okay. And what do you do? If you have a princess who's under a curse, you have to find a prince to kiss the curse away. So they get desperate and they just basically hit up every prince that they can find in all the neighboring kingdoms to come kiss her. And so over the course of the novel, you just have prince after prince after prince show up being like, hey, let's kiss. It'll be great.
Right. Classic. Nice. And okay. I have to say, I do love this idea that Tandy is cursed to stay in the bookshop. Like,
Yeah, it
aside
sounds
from the
awful, doesn't it?
princes, yeah. Aside from everything else, it is just so much fun. How did you come up with that? Like, what gave you that idea?
So that is a really, really good question. And I wish I had a really
Mm,
easy answer that is something like, I've always wished that I could be stuck in a bookstore.
right.
But the truth is some sort of complicated sort of mashup of like the fact that I grew up reading fairy tales and watching, 80s and 90s fantasy films, and that I myself am a big reader and I never have enough time to read. And honestly, don't I really just in my heart of hearts want to live in a bookstore? And
Mhm.
just sort of the idea that it's just sort of trying to think about what a modern day fairy tale would look like. It's just as a an exercise. And the idea of a princess being stuck in a bookstore and then her parents sending prince after prince after prince up to try and get her out of the curse and it not working at all. That was just the seed of the story. And once I sort of came up with the idea, I was like, oh, I might as well try writing it down. And one thing led to another.
Nice. I love this. I think it's a great illustration of the way that ideas do just sometimes like conglomerate out of a bunch of different desires and just like things, things that you see that you're like, huh, it's a piece of something interesting, and then it all comes together.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Nice. And speaking of things coming together, um, Tandy starts off the book by listing a bunch of reasons to not be a princess, which I enjoyed very much. But it does beg the question, is this something you've given a lot of thought to?
I mean, I would be lying if I said I have never thought about this at all. Obviously, I mean, not obviously, but when I was a little girl, I was obsessed with the idea of princesses. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I mean, my world was not particularly princessy. And what I wanted more than anything in the world, very Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables. I mean, I wanted a dress with like giant leg of mutton sleeves and hem down to the floor that dragged around. And I used to like, whenever I went to parties and got the little that hats that are shaped like a party cone or like shaped like a cone, I would always bring them home and like staple handkerchiefs to them so that they'd be princess hats. I was
Nice.
obsessed with the idea of being a princess. And obviously, I then grew up and learned about things like politics and like the
Uh,
royals and monarchies. And my relationship with the idea of being a princess became a little more complicated. But
mm,
one of the things that was actually quite important to me when I was working on this book and when I was thinking about who Tandy was that like I didn't want to fall into the trap of making her I'm not like other girls girl. So it's like I really wanted to make it clear that she loves clothes. Like I think there's a point in the beginning where she's like, I love the dresses and I love the fancy things and I love the
yeah.
embroidery and I love the fact that I'm surrounded by beauty all the time and I think these things are wonderful. It's just that also I have to do all this really boring stuff and I have no way of telling people I don't like doing it. Um,
Right.
and so like from there, I think I took a lot of inspiration from various sort of like honestly from Jane Austen and Georgette Hare and sort of some of their characters and the way they relate to the kind of things that they have to do when they're getting ready for dances, for for seeing people, for doing things, like the fact that like when they're on their own and they're in their own domestic spheres, um, their lives are a little more casual. But the moment that they have to see people and be seen, all of a sudden, all of these rigorous things have to start happening to them and around them. And they are no longer sort of in full control of who they are as people anymore. They stop being themselves and they become I don't want to say objects because that's not quite the right word, but they become part of something larger than themselves. And that's really what I wanted to get out with her was that she feels like she has no control over this sort of role that she was born into, and she doesn't hate all of it, but a lot of it is very difficult, but she doesn't have a way to say, can we renegotiate this, because I didn't have any
Right.
choice when I was thrust into it and I really like it.
Right. Well, and it's funny, it within that context, it's, the contrast then of her way out of it, at least for a little while, right, is to have even less control, like to be cursed, you know? Like, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it was sort of the dream, right? Like, don't we all, if we have jobs that we don't really love, think to ourselves, wouldn't it be great if I just got snowed in in a nice pub
Right?
somewhere and I couldn't go to work? I had to stay
Right.
here for a really long time. So that's sort of where that comes from. It's just, it is obviously, it's not so much of an onerous duty for her to be stuck in a bookstore. And, you might think to yourself at first, well, I mean, she can't go outside, but she doesn't really miss it.
Well, when you have enough good books.
Exactly. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
She loves to read. She finally has the time and the energy and the like just the space to
Mm.
read. And that's all that she really wants is to sort of get lost in her own imagination.
I love that. I feel like that tension of like, all I want is like a really simple life. I feel like that's very relatable,
Yeah.
you know, especially these days. But
Yeah.
I also I want to go back because you say you were princess crazy, and I love the resourcefulness, honestly, of taking party hats and adding handkerchiefs to them. Very cute. If you had to put your finger on it, like why? What do you think was it that made you so drawn to the idea?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question.
I
I
know I'm
mean,
putting you on the spot, but
no, no, not at all. I mean, the crazy thing is, I was in many ways very tomboyish as a kid. Like, I climbed trees, I ran around outside, I was very nature heavy. I just like wanted to be outside, and I loved being dirty. I loved digging around in the mud. I wanted to be a
Mm,
paleontologist when I grew up, which is all about digging in the mud.
nice.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, I also loved the idea of, beautiful dresses and long hair and these sort of things that I didn't have, in my sort of humdrum to my own imagination day to day
Mm,
life. And I think that's what that represented was some sort of fabulous othering that I could sort of imagine
right.
myself into. And you add to that, of course, the fact that in the 80s we had things like, I mean, obviously Barbie was at her pink peak, but also
Right.
we had the She-Ra Princess of Power, sort of like the first
Mm,
iteration of that, which was something that
mm,
I loved when I was a kid, and various other sort of media that was presented for younger girls, that was very pink and princessy, but at the same time was, I mean, you had like, if we go far enough back, you have Rainbow Bright and Strawberry Shortcake and Rose Petal, if anybody remembers that anymore.
yeah.
Um, but like this was like basically a little girl who had this beloved garden and she had to leave the garden behind. And on her last day, she goes out into the garden, she cries, and every teardrop that falls from her eye onto a flower, the flower is then brought to life. And so basically, this garden winds up being a garden full of like princess flowers. I'm not kidding.
Okay.
That was sort of a version of femininity that was served to me alongside, of course, my own
Mm,
needs and desires, which included, climbing trees and digging up dinosaurs.
right,
And
right,
so
right, right.
that was, I think that's really where that came from, was like, on the one hand, what being a woman meant to me when I was really little,
Mm,
versus also what I wanted. And then of course something like She-Ra comes along where she's both a princess and she kicks ass. I'm like, this is it. This is what
right.
I want.
Yeah, 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 yeah. All of the things. Yeah. I like that. Okay. But just to switch gears a little bit, we do, of course, have the Parade of Princes, but we also have a pirate
We do have a pirate.
in your story. And I don't think it's spoiling too much to me to say that he is, that we have kind of a love story that happens there. Uh, what was your inspiration for it?
Again, we're gonna go back to the 80s. I'm sorry I keep talking about my childhood in the 80s.
Ah, no
I've
worries.
literally never talked about my childhood in the 80s this much before. Um, but so I think, because I was thinking about this ahead of time, because you sent me the questions ahead of time. I'm like, this is a really good question. Why did I put a pirate in
Mhm.
this book? And I will tell you why I put a pirate in this book. Number one, because I grew up watching The Princess Bride. And obviously we have Carrie Elways marching around as the Dread Pirate Roberts in all black, which I've
Yep.
never gotten over. But also Mandy Patinkin as Inigo Montoya, who then, spoilers for a 40-year-old movie, becomes the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Right.
But I'm like, there's that moment where it's like, I think my sexuality, but might be men in tight breeches with swords. Like, I feel like something has awakened in me. So there's that, but there's also, like, a more serious answer is, twofold, I think. Number one, there is the sort of like the modern idea of what fairy tales are. Like, if we sort of think about the Disneyfication of fairy tales over the course of the late 20th century, and sort of the way that sort of dashing male characters are presented to us. Like, they go from being princes to being kind of morally ambiguous types. And so obviously I sort of inherited a lot of that. I absorbed a lot of that, as I was growing up. But then beyond that, when I was a teenager. So I read my first proper romance novel when I was 13 years old. And at the time, I was really struggling to find books that both centered female characters and female experiences, but also had like all of the elements that I wanted, including this will not be a surprise given everything I've said so far. Romance and ass kissing, ass kicking, not ass kissing, ass kicking. Um, and what I discovered in romance novels was, and again, I mean, we're talking about stuff that was written in the 80s and early 90s at this point, but we're talking about
Mm.
books where, unlike the fantasy novels I was reading, where female characters often didn't have the kind of agency and the kind of stories that I was looking for, I was finding those in romance novels. And for whatever reason, and I'm definitely laying the blame at the door of The Princess Bride, I was really attracted to morally ambiguous characters on boats. So that's, I suspect, where the pirate came from. And also, I just thought it would be funny because I was, again, when I was sort of coming up with the idea for the book, I was just trying to think about things that made me happy. And I was like, what would be funnier than this girl running this bookstore and all these princes are coming by and being annoying? And meanwhile, there's this guy who keeps stealing her stuff and he's really hot and she doesn't know how to deal with that.
He does make a very good contrast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I like the fact that he gets her. He really gets her in a way that the other characters don't. Despite the
Mm.
fact that they're very, very different. But also, I mean, I just think it's funny that he comes in and steals her stuff.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I have to say, because you started off that answer apologizing, I don't, no, 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 no apologies necessary. We've talked about it before on the podcast, and I'm trying to remember who said it because they were so smart. But somebody, it has been said before that, everything that we grow up with, that we read, everything we watch, like it all just becomes, part of the big mixing going on in our head, right? That then spits out new stories. Yeah. So it completely makes sense, right?
No, but for sure, that's just a huge part of that of what this book is just comes from the fact that I sort of recreated all the things that I loved when I was young and wanted
Hmm.
to see more of.
Fair enough. Well, and actually, that sets us up pretty well to say. So, obviously, as part of my preparation for the podcast, I have a copy of Stay for the Spell, and it's one of the ARCs, the advanced reader copies. And in that, there's a letter to the reader that you wrote, and you mentioned that you were writing this book got you through a hard time. And I really, um, really appreciated the fact that this book started and then continued as a way that you were making yourself feel better. Uh, do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a bit of an intense story. So I just want to warn that I'm
Mm.
going to be talking about cancer a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
I started the novel sort of as probably very clear from everything I've said so far on a complete lark. I just came up with the idea and started writing it. And I'd written about 35,000 words when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And it was advanced but not deadly at that point. But it was very surprising. We're very close. I'm an only child. She's a single parent, and we live 8,000 miles away from each other. I live in the UK. She lives in California, and there were just from that moment on, it just I so I'm I'm a chronic insomniac, just to begin with, and I went from like not sleeping very much, just not sleeping at all. I was very concerned, obviously, and all of the things that we anybody who struggles with insomnia knows all about, intrusive thoughts and the problems that you have sleeping or when you wake up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep. And this was just happening all the time. And I was lying there in bed being like, I've got to get out of my own head. And so what I would do is I would just get up and I'd come into this room where I'm sitting right now and I would open up my computer and just start writing. And like the more upset I was about something, the more ridiculous I would make whatever was happening in the book. Um, I mean, my intent was just to make the most ridiculous, the silliest, the frothiest thing that I could possibly imagine. And it did. It worked. It got me out of my head. I've made a joke several times before, and I will continue to make it till the end of time that I wrote the bulk of this novel between the hours of 3 and 6 a.m. And that is very, very true. I wrote almost the so it's about 100,000 words. So I wrote the last 65,000 words really just late at night, early in the morning when I couldn't sleep and I just needed to not think. And the good news is, and the really, really good news is that when the book publishes in April, my mom will have been cancer free for 2 years. So so the whole story of the novel is tied up with her diagnosis and her treatment and her recovery. And so, like, I finished it when I was visiting her in California, and I signed with an agent when I was visiting her during her surgery, and like I signed with a publisher when I was visiting her for chemotherapy, and like it all sort of happened. It was sort of real highs and lows in sort of my personal life and my writing life, and they all kind of came together. And I also she didn't know, like she had no idea, and I didn't tell her about the book until after I'd signed the first publishing deal. Um, and I then wouldn't let her read it until there were arcs. So she literally didn't get to read it until there was a proof copy that I could send her.
Aw.
And she doesn't, this is a secret, so hopefully she won't hear this before she sees it. But the book is dedicated to her, which she doesn't know yet because I didn't put the
Yeah.
dedication in the arc. So at some point or another, she will learn that story. But yes, so that's the story of where the book came from, and it really did get me out of my head at a time when nothing else really would have. I mean, there's
Mm.
the things that ordinarily I do when I'm upset about stuff. I take walks or read books or whatever. Hard to do that between the hours of 3 and 6 a.m. So
Fair.
yeah,
Yeah, fair. That's very, very touching and very lovely. And I'm very glad, of course, that the way, like, it couldn't have turned out in a better way, really. Um, and it kind of a little bit answers my next question that I had, which is Stay for a Spell is your debut novel, right? So first of all, yay. But yeah, what was that like with the journey to publication? Obviously must have been super stressful
it was
on
it
like a
was
personal side. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, in a horrible way, the fact that I was so stressed out about my mom meant that I just sort of coasted through the rest of it. Um, but I felt very lucky in that. So what happened with the book, just to back up a little tiny bit. So I wrote the first draft and I remember looking at it. Nobody knew I'd written it. Like, I think my husband had an inkling that I'd written something because I've written a couple of novels before and not gotten anywhere with them. This one, I finished it and I looked at it. I thought to myself, this might be okay. So what I did was because I was in California at the time, I emailed a friend who happens to be quite honest and is a fantasy fan. And I'm like, can you read this book and just tell me the truth? It was like, what I promised myself was if she didn't like it, I knew she would tell me. And that would mean that it was okay and I could move on with my life. But if she did like it, I might actually have something real. So I sent it to her and she read it overnight, which I was not expecting, and got back to me the next day. And she still talks about the Barn Pirate. um, she has actually already read the second book and fed back on it.
Nice.
So from that sort of moment on, I figured I should probably start taking it seriously. And so I took her sort of beta edits on board and I made some changes to the book and shared it with my husband, who also made some suggestions. And I made the changes and then I went out on submission with it. And like I said, I've written a couple of novels before and I've, through a combination of just bad timing and bad luck, just had no joy anywhere, never signed with anyone, never got anywhere with them. And so I didn't go in with high expectations. And I had absolutely the kind of sort of dream experience that that you hear about and get jealous of when you're out querying your own novel, which is I got people calling it in within 24 hours. I had my first offer of representation with a couple of days. It wound up
Nice.
being it went really, really fast, and it was a very interesting and intense experience. And I have to admit, the first time I met with an agent to have a conversation about the book, I was so nervous and so sort of keyed up. I was actually shaking, and I had to sit on my hands so that she couldn't tell.
Yeah.
and I thought to I did not expect that reaction, but it was mostly because it was the first time that I had someone who wasn't a friend and didn't know me and had no
Mm.
stake in the book telling me that they liked it and what they liked about it, and saying that they wanted to represent me and sell the rights. And that was very, very special and very sort of intense experience. All of
My
which is a
gosh,
long
yeah.
way of saying that I was really, really, really lucky. And all of these things, I know that this is not the way that 99% of book deals happen. Um,
Mm.
and I certainly know from my own experience. And so I will say that it was absolutely a dream experience, but also that I feel incredibly, incredibly fortunate that it happened that way. And that, it just happened to be that a bunch of people liked what I was offering with, the story of the princess in the bookstore.
Yeah, starting with an honest friend, right? And that's very
Yeah,
good. We all need one of those.
absolutely.
Yeah. And you say she has already read the next one, so we know there is a next one,
There is a next
right?
one.
'Cause
In
that
fact, there is a third
okay.
one, which I'm currently
Ooh,
writing.
okay. Ah, very nice. So is that I of course I usually ask folks, what's next, and so it sounds like you're gonna stick with the series.
Yeah, so
Nice.
they're all standalone. What I've done is I've written them essentially as sort of in romance. It's referred to as anthologizing. So a bit like Bridgerton, where they're all part of a
Okay.
connected series, but each book stands alone, and each book has its own focus on individual characters.
Fun.
Yeah. So book two is not about Tandy, and book three is not about Tandy. Although I make no promises about who might show up. Yeah, it's been really fun, and there's a little connecting tissue between the three of them, but it's been really important to me to make sure that they can all be read completely standalone and in any order.
Mm,
And I think because just sort of thinking back to like when I was younger and I was reading books out of order, and I just whichever one I picked up first was the one I read first, and I wanted to make sure that
right.
that was that I made the series as accessible as possible for readers.
Nice. Yeah, it's its own special skill,
Mm.
honestly. Yeah.
Well, let's see if it
Yeah.
works.
I'm sure. No, I'm sure. That's very cool. Very cool. Okay. Another question I ask of everybody. What advice would you give to yourself if you could go back and talk to yourself when you were just starting out? Maybe with this book, maybe with writing in general, whatever you like.
That is a really good question. I mean, the advice that I would give myself is the advice that I give myself every day. It's really just to, it's the button chair advice. Every single day I try and make myself sit down and think about, not necessarily putting words on paper, but just sort of sitting down and having a think about whatever it is. And sometimes that's taking a walk and sort of puzzling over plot points or characters. And sometimes it's just, thinking about stuff that makes me laugh and that I might want to incorporate into the book. But sort of giving myself sort of the grace and the time every day to have sort of a creative moment. Because it all comes good in the finished text. And if not this book, then the next book or the next one down the road. But I think that's my advice to myself, is to not worry about hitting word targets or particular times or anything like that, but to just sort of like embrace the creative flow and give myself the freedom to have those moments when they come, however short they might be.
Love that, especially as you said, the grace in it, right? Of
Mm,
recognizing that not every day is a day that you sit down and type out, however many words that it was supposed to be.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that's very beautiful. Yeah. All right. We will get to our final question in just a minute, but before we do, uh, I will have your like website, book, and all that linked in the show notes. But is there any particular way you want people to find you, or place you're most active?
Oh my gosh. So I took a step back from social media last year. So I'm not
Mm,
as active on Instagram as I used to be. I'm trying to sort of ramp up again now that we're getting closer to publication. But I'm going to be
fair.
totally honest. I actually spend a lot of time on Tumblr, and I have an author Tumblr. And I've actually, because I've had this author name for a long time, just for your readers or for your listeners who don't know, Amy Coombe is a pseudonym because my real name is the name of a famous mystery author. So
This is the downside to being named after somebody, I guess. Not that you necessarily were, but
Yeah, but exactly. So yes, I've had this pseudonym for a long time because I used to write short fiction under the pseudonym, and so I've got a Tumblr that I love. I mean, Tumblr sort of feels like the last of the old form social media websites or
Fair,
sites of any
yeah.
sort these days because, I'm not fed anything by an algorithm. It's everything I
Mm.
see is entirely curated. And I have a fair amount of control over it. And so I find Tumblr and I go back and forth. I'll go through months where I don't ever like open up the website, and then I'll go through months where I'm on it every day. And what I love about it
Mm.
is that it's so highly curated, and so the stuff that I put on my Amy Coombe Tumblr are things that are inspirational for me when I'm writing, things that make me happy, things that remind me of my books, things that sort of remind me of who I am when I'm sort of reaching into myself to write, and things that I want to
Mm.
remember when I'm writing. And so it's a really random hodgepodge of things like quotes from the X-Files and like covers of other books that I like, and I don't know,
Right.
pictures of the night sky. Um, but it's all kind of there. And so I actually, in a funny way, I would say that anyone who really wanted to sort of get a sense of who I am outside of the books themselves, that's probably the best place because I think there's a version of myself on there that feels very authentic.
Nice. That's good. And a pretty good endorsement of Tumblr, I will say.
It's cool when I say that. I've had my primary Tumblr account, I think, since the month Tumblr was created.
Oh,
Like I
man.
found out about it on Gawker. Like that's how long we've had it.
Nice.
So yeah.
Very cool. All right. So, on that note, our final question, what is one win that you've had in the past week? Could be anything.
Okay, so this is a really good question, and I have a two-part answer for it. So please forgive me while I indulge myself in
Oh,
this
no.
absolutely very, very silly answer.
Go for
So
it.
I'm a bird watcher, love birds, and my so it's currently half term, which means my son's off from school for a week, and he goes to a camp that happens to be about a 2.5 mile walk from my house, and you can get there and back by walking through this enormous park. And it's great bird watching in this park. I promise there's a point to this story. So basically, my husband and I walk through this park every morning to drop our son off and walk home again. It's a great way to start the day. And
Yeah.
couple of days ago we were walking through the park and he said, I wonder if we can feed the crows, because we were talking about how there are people who feed crows, and then crows, because crows have great memories and they remember people who
Yeah,
feed
yeah.
them, and they sometimes bring people gifts. um and so my husband was making a joke about how he would like to be brought gifts by crows. He's like, what if we start feeding the crows on the commons? So we did a
Okay.
little research and we found that what you can do is if you buy unshelled, unsalted peanuts. Apparently, this is very good for crows. They love them. So we went out and bought ourselves a bag of unshelled, unsalted peanuts. And the next morning, so this was yesterday morning, we dropped our son off. Then we're walking back, and we get to a part of the common where there's always a crow around. And so we see a crow, and we open up the bag of peanuts, and we throw a peanut to the crow. And all of a sudden, and I'm not kidding, literally 60 crows descend from nowhere, surrounded by crows, and they're all a very polite distance away from us. Like nobody is closer than about 5 feet, but there have to be 60 crows just surrounding us. And so we wind up giving them all of the peanuts, and I was like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. So that's win number one. Except for that afternoon, because I was working from home, and again, this was just yesterday. I was working from home. I go downstairs to make myself lunch. Our kitchen window looks out over the backyard. I see a flash of color in the backyard. We feed birds in the backyard. I see a flash of color and I think it might be a squirrel. We don't really have squirrels in the area, but I'm like, what could that possibly be? It's a sparrowhawk sitting on one of our garden chairs, looking very aggrieved because it clearly has just not eaten a sparrow. So she's sitting there looking pissed off. I can't call it. This is cold in London right now. It's
Oh,
like, this is how could this possibly top the 60 crows I fed peanuts to this morning? And yet somehow it does. So there you go.
Nice.
My big win for the week has been bird related in every way.
Well, what I was really waiting for, what we need is part 3, where the crows bring you a gift.
I know. I really want them to, but I think I need to feed them peanuts for more than 2 days in a row. But I'm working on it. We talk again.
That's fair.
Okay,
yeah,
you have to bring me back on. Give me like 6 months.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And we'll be talking about book 2.
Exactly. Book 2 is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
You're going to love it.
Woohoo. Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Amy. Yeah. And again, listeners, all of Amy's links are in the show notes. You need to go buy yourself some unsalted peanuts, clearly.
Feed them to the crows,
And,
get presents.
Yeah. Yep. And I will talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Cozy Alchemy is brought to you by Authors on the Air, and our theme music is by Cyberwave Orchestra. For everything else, blame Elle. You can find her online at ellehartford.com.